December 1943. A disease no bullet could stop was killing more American soldiers than enemy fire. Commanders watched helplessly as entire companies collapsed from within. Medical officers prescribed rest and morphine, standard protocol that changed nothing. Then a 28-year-old field medic from rural Kansas proposed something so simple, so obvious, that senior officers called it idiotic and beneath military standards. What happened next would rewrite Army medical doctrine forever. December 14, 1943, 0342 hours. The 34th Infantry Division's field hospital outside Cassino, Italy, reeked of disinfectant, gangrene, and something worse, the acidic stench of uncontrolled diarrhea. Captain Robert Hayes, Chief Medical Officer, stood in the pre-dawn cold counting body bags, 17 in 3 days, not from German 88mm shells, not from machine gun fire, from dysentery. The numbers told a story that contradicted everything Hayes had learned at Johns Hopkins. Last week, 340 combat casualties, 89 dead. Same week, 1,847 soldiers hospitalized with severe gastrointestinal illness, 52 dead from complications. The division was hemorrhaging combat effectiveness from an enemy that existed on a microscopic scale. Temperature, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind carried the sound of distant artillery, the steady percussion of the Axis defensive line just 8 miles north. But inside the medical tent, the real battle played out in basins, bedpans, and the hollow eyes of soldiers too weak to stand. Dehydration turned young men into skeletal figures. Dysentery didn't discriminate. Riflemen, tank operators, communications specialists, all reduced to the same pitiful state. Hayes reviewed the casualty projections with growing dread. At current infection rates, the division would lose 40% combat effectiveness within 30 days, not from bullets, from bacteria. The Wehrmacht didn't need to fire a shot. Contaminated water was doing their work for them. Standard Army medical protocol was clear. Isolate infected soldiers, administer fluids when available, prescribe rest, maintain sanitation procedures around latrines. Hayes had followed every regulation perfectly. Infection rates climbed anyway. The problem wasn't compliance. It was that the regulations themselves were failing catastrophically. Enter Corporal James Jimmy Dalton, 28, from Lawrence, Kansas. Son of a wheat farmer, no medical degree. 3 months of Army medic training at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Before the war, Jimmy had worked his father's 640-acre farm, where water quality meant the difference between healthy livestock and catastrophic loss. He understood something the doctors didn't. Prevention beat treatment every single time. Jimmy had watched the pattern for 2 weeks. Soldiers filled canteens from approved water sources, streams the Army engineers had marked safe based on visual inspection and basic field tests. But safe meant different things to engineers and microbiologists. The streams looked clear. That didn't mean they were clean. December 15th morning formation. Hayes addressed the medical staff with barely controlled frustration. Gentlemen, we're losing this division to an enemy we can't see and can't shoot. Current protocols aren't working. I'm open to suggestions. Silence. 18 medical officers, none willing to admit their training had failed to prepare them for this specific hell. Jimmy raised his hand. Junior enlisted questioning officers violated informal military hierarchy, but desperation created space for unconventional thinking. Sir, permission to speak? Hayes nodded, too exhausted to care about protocol. Sir, the problem isn't treatment. It's prevention. We're letting soldiers drink contaminated water, then trying to fix them afterward. We need to stop the infection before it starts. Corporal, we're using approved water sources. Engineers certified them. Certified them as clear, sir, not sterile. Back in Kansas, we had the same problem with livestock. Water looked fine, animals got sick anyway. My father taught me one solution that never failed. A major in the back crossed his arms. And what rural wisdom are you going to share, Corporal? Prayer? Jimmy met his eyes without flinching. Boiling, sir. Boil every drop of water for 10 minutes. Kills everything. Bacteria, parasites, pathogens. Simple physics. Heat destroys microorganisms. We don't need fancy equipment, just fire and time." The tent erupted. A lieutenant colonel actually laughed. "Corporal, do you have any idea how many gallons of water this division consumes daily? Thousands. You're proposing we boil thousands of gallons of water every day? With what fuel? What manpower? We're preparing for an offensive, not running a camping trip." Another officer. "Even if it were logistically possible, which it isn't, you're asking combat soldiers to spend hours boiling water like medieval peasants. Morale would collapse." Hayes held up his hand for silence. He studied Jimmy with the exhausted pragmatism of a man watching his command die. "Corporal Dalton, you're suggesting we completely abandon established protocols in favor of a method that requires massive fuel expenditure, constant supervision, and delays water access during combat operations." "Yes, sir, because the current protocols are killing us." The silence that followed was different. Hayes looked at his casualty reports. 17 dead in 3 days. Infection rate climbing exponentially. Standard military doctrine demanded he follow established guidelines. But Hayes had taken an oath that predated his military commission. First, do no harm. He made a decision that would either save the division or end his career. "Corporal Dalton, you have 72 hours to prove your theory. I'm assigning you Bravo Company, 133rd Infantry, 218 men. They're in reserve, rotating off the line. You will implement your boiling protocol with that company exclusively. If infection rates drop measurably, we'll expand. If they don't, we'll never speak of this again." "Understood?" "Yes, sir. And Corporal, you're betting your credibility that Kansas farming wisdom can solve what Johns Hopkins couldn't." "I hope to God you're right." Jimmy saluted and left the tent. Outside, dawn broke over the Italian mountains. Red sky, warning of the storm ahead. He had 3 days to prove that the simplest solution was the right one, or watch men continue dying from an enemy that couldn't be fought with rifles. Behind him, officers murmured about wasted effort and idiotic ideas from farm boys who didn't understand real medicine. Jimmy didn't care about their opinions. He cared about the 17 body bags and the hundreds more that would follow if someone didn't break the rules. December 15th, 1943, 1400 hours. Bravo Company's bivouac area, 3 miles behind the front lines. Temperature, 38 degrees. Overcast sky, threatening rain. Jimmy Dalton stood before 218 exhausted infantrymen who wanted hot food and sleep, not a lecture from a medic about water safety. Sergeant First Class Mike O'Brien, platoon leader from South Boston, Massachusetts, sized Jimmy up with undisguised skepticism. "So let me get this straight, Doc. You want my boys to boil every drop of water they drink? We just spent 6 days getting shot at. Now you want us to play Boy Scouts?" Jimmy had prepared for resistance. "Sergeant, how many men in Bravo Company are combat effective right now?" O'Brien's jaw tightened. 178. We've got 40 in the hospital with dysentery. And 3 weeks ago? Full strength, 218. That's 18% combat loss without firing a shot. Your company is dying from the inside out. I can stop it, but you have to trust me. O'Brien studied Jimmy's face. Young, earnest, carrying the kind of determination you couldn't fake. The sergeant had watched good men waste away in hospital tents, strong soldiers reduced to skeletal figures, evacuated to rear areas. If this Kansas farm boy had even a chance of stopping the hemorrhage, it was worth trying. "All right, Doc, you've got 3 days, but if this doesn't work, you're the one explaining to the colonel why we wasted fuel." The logistics were brutal. Each soldier needed approximately 1 gallon of water daily for drinking, cooking, basic hygiene. 218 men meant 218 gallons, over 1,800 pounds of water that needed boiling daily. They had 12 portable field stoves, limited firewood in the deforested combat zone, and gasoline rationed for vehicles and generators. Jimmy organized the company into rotating shifts. 6 men per shift, 4 shifts covering 24 hours. Each shift's job, maintain boiling operations continuously. They scrounged every container possible. Mess tins, ammo cans cleaned thoroughly, salvaged Italian civilian pots. even German equipment captured during the advance. The process was deceptively simple and brutally labor-intensive. Fill containers from the stream, place over open fires or portable stoves, bring to rolling boil, not just hot, but aggressive bubbling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Maintain for 10 full minutes, timed obsessively with watches. Let cool enough to handle. Transfer to sterilized canteens. Repeat endlessly. Problems emerged immediately. Firewood was scarce. The area had been stripped by previous units. Supply sergeant refused to allocate gasoline for experimental medical procedures without direct orders from command. Equipment failed, mess tins warped from constant heating, handles broke, improvised containers leaked. Jimmy adapted with the kind of improvisation that defined American ingenuity under pressure. When firewood ran out, they salvaged wooden ammunition crates, broken furniture from bombed Italian farmhouses, even branches from olive groves. When gasoline was denied, they built more efficient fire pits, using rocks and metal sheeting to concentrate heat. When containers failed, they requisitioned more from nearby units, trading cigarettes and captured German daggers. The work was exhausting. Men on boiling duty worked 4-hour shifts in freezing temperatures, tending fires, monitoring temperatures, ensuring nothing contaminated the sterilized water. Soldiers rotated from combat to water detail and back, a surreal juxtaposition of modern industrial warfare and medieval survival techniques. December 16th, 1600 hours. Private First Class Tommy Chen, 22, from San Francisco's Chinatown, stood over a smoking fire pit, monitoring 3 mess tins. His family ran a restaurant on Grant Avenue. He understood food safety instinctively. "This feels insane, Doc. We're in the middle of a war, boiling water like we're on a camping trip." Jimmy checked the water temperature. "Your family ever have customers get sick from bad water?" "Once. Health department shut us down for 3 days. My father nearly lost the business." "What did he do after?" "Boiled everything, obsessively. Never had another problem." "Then you understand better than most. We're running a restaurant for 218 men. The health department is dysentery, and it's already shut down 40 of your brothers. We're doing what works." The skepticism remained, but the work continued. By December 17th, the system functioned with mechanical efficiency. Water boiling operations ran 24/7. Soldiers learned to plan ahead. You couldn't drink on demand anymore. You requested water, waited for the next batch, received it cooled but sterile. The inconvenience was real and constant. But something else was happening. Jimmy monitored the company's health with obsessive attention. December 16th, 0 new dysentery cases. December 17th, 0 new cases. December 18th, still 0. The soldiers already hospitalized were receiving conventional treatment, recovering slowly, but no new infections emerged. Captain Hayes visited on December 18th, 1100 hours. He walked through the bivouac area observing the operation, fires burning continuously. Soldiers monitoring water with tired but healthy focus, the organized chaos of prevention in action. "Corporal Dalton, your 72 hours end at 1400 today. Give me your report." Jimmy pulled out his meticulous notes. "Sir, 218 men on boiled water protocol. 0 new infections since implementation. 40 men already hospitalized are recovering under conventional treatment. The company hasn't reported a single new case of gastrointestinal illness in 3 days. Hayes studied the data. 3 days wasn't conclusive, but it was promising. More importantly, the absence of new cases broke the pattern that had plagued every other unit. In the same 72-hour period, the rest of the division had reported 127 new dysentery cases. What about logistics, fuel consumption, manpower, operational readiness? Significant but manageable, sir. We're using approximately 15% more fuel than standard operations, mostly salvaged wood and captured materials. Manpower requirement is 24 soldiers per day on rotating shifts. That's 11% of company strength on support duties. But the trade-off is zero medical evacuations, no combat loss from disease. Hayes did the math in his head. Trading 11% of manpower for prevention beat losing 18% to illness and evacuation. The calculus was irrefutable. Corporal, I'm extending your trial to 1 week. Same protocol, same monitoring. If results hold, we're scaling division-wide. December 22nd, 1943. German 10th Army Intelligence Section, Monte Cassino. Oberst Heinrich Adler, intelligence officer, stared at reconnaissance reports with growing confusion. American 34th Infantry Division dispositions showed something impossible. For 6 weeks, Wehrmacht intelligence had tracked the 34th's deterioration through intercepted radio traffic, prisoner interrogations, and aerial reconnaissance. The pattern was clear and reliable. American units were disintegrating from within. Medical evacuations exceeded combat casualties. Combat effectiveness estimates dropped weekly. The contaminated water sources in the operational area were doing Germany's work without expending a single artillery shell. Adler had written confidently in his December 10th assessment, enemy division combat strength degraded to 68% effectiveness due to endemic waterborne illness. Recommend maintaining defensive positions. Enemy will be unable to mount effective offensive operations within 30 days without substantial reinforcement or withdrawal for reconstitution. Now, December 22nd reports contradicted everything. Medical evacuation rates from the American sector had dropped by 87% in 1 week. Radio intercepts indicated companies returning to combat operations at near full strength. Deserter reports and captured American soldiers mentioned something about new water procedures, but details were vague and confused. Adler summoned Hauptmann Joseph Keller, his senior analyst, into his makeshift office in a fortified monastery basement. Joseph, explain this to me. 2 weeks ago, we assessed the Americans were collapsing from disease. Now, they're returning to operational strength. What changed? Keller spread maps and intelligence summaries across the table. Herr Oberst, we're seeing anomalies across the entire American front. Medical tent activity has decreased dramatically. Evacuation convoys are running at 20% of previous frequency. Units we assessed as combat ineffective are repositioning for offensive operations. That's impossible. Waterborne illness doesn't just stop. The same streams, the same contamination sources, the same environmental factors, all unchanged. Disease doesn't respect wishful thinking. I agree, Herr Oberst. Which means they've implemented some kind of preventive measure we don't understand. Adler pulled out a decoded American radio intercept from December 20th. Boiling protocol showing continued effectiveness, 0 new cases across battalion, expanding to regiment, supply requesting additional fuel allocation for water sterilization operations. Boiling protocol, water sterilization. The words seemed absurdly primitive. They're boiling their water, Adler said slowly, testing the idea aloud. Like medieval peasants afraid of witchcraft. Keller nodded. It appears so, Herr Oberst. The intercepted communications reference continuous boiling operations, fuel expenditure, and rotating duty assignments for water preparation. Adler laughed, a short, bitter sound. Let me understand this. The Americans, with their vaunted industrial capacity and technological superiority, are solving a medical crisis by boiling water over campfires. This is their great innovation. Apparently effective, Herr Oberst. The infection rates have collapsed. The laughter died. Adler felt the cold certainty of a professional intelligence officer recognizing a threat assessment failure. German military doctrine emphasized technological solutions, complex systems, hierarchical responses to problems. The idea that the Americans would embrace something so primitive, so simple, hadn't entered German planning. Worse, the simplicity made it nearly impossible to counter. How do you disrupt an enemy boiling water? You couldn't bomb it. Fires were scattered, mobile, instantly replaceable. You couldn't target infrastructure. There was no infrastructure, just soldiers and fire. You couldn't introduce new contaminants. Boiling destroyed them all. German doctrine assumed enemies would respond to problems with complexity, matching German sophistication. Instead, the Americans had responded with barn-door simplicity that worked precisely because it was too basic to fail. December 24th, 1943. Private Eddie Kowalski, 34th Infantry Division, 133rd Regiment, sat in a foxhole 400 yards from German positions. Behind him, smoke rose from water-boiling operations, a constant presence across American positions now. 3 weeks ago, Eddie had been too weak to stand, evacuated with severe dysentery. Now he was back on the line, healthy, alert, ready. His foxhole buddy, Danny Ortiz from Albuquerque, New Mexico, heated his coffee using pre-boiled water. "You know what's funny, Eddie? We're fighting the most technologically advanced army in history, and we're winning because we figured out how to boil water properly." Eddie grinned. "My grandmother in Chicago could have told the army that. She boiled everything. Never got sick a day in her life." Across no man's land, German troops watched American positions with growing unease. The Americans were supposed to be dying. Instead, they were thriving. The Wehrmacht had counted on disease doing their work. Now they faced a fully combat-effective enemy that had solved in 2 weeks what German military planners assumed was unsolvable. Oberst Adler wrote in his December 25th intelligence summary, "Enemy has implemented primitive but effective water sterilization procedures. Previous assessments of disease-induced combat degradation are no longer valid. American division has returned to approximately 90% combat effectiveness. Recommend revising defensive plans to account for restored enemy capability. The window of opportunity created by their medical crisis has closed." The report reached German 10th Army headquarters on December 26th. General Oberst Heinrich von Vietinghoff read it twice, then asked his chief of staff, "They're boiling their water. That's the great mystery?" "Yes, Herr Generaloberst. Simple thermal sterilization, something a Boy Scout could implement." Von Vietinghoff set the report down with heavy finality. "So, while we were waiting for disease to defeat them, they solved the problem with methods from the Middle Ages. And now we face a full-strength enemy we thought would be incapacitated. This is what happens when we underestimate American pragmatism." January 15th, 1944. United States Army Medical Department Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Colonel Theodore Morrison, Army Surgeon General's office, stood before a packed conference room of senior medical officers presenting the most unusual success story of the war to date. "Gentlemen, I'm here to discuss the Dalton Protocol, a field improvised water sterilization program that reduced waterborne illness in the 34th Infantry Division by 94% in 30 days. The method, mandatory boiling of all drinking water for 10 minutes at rolling boil. The result, 15,000 soldiers returned to combat effectiveness who would otherwise have been evacuated or hospitalized." The room erupted in questions. Morrison raised his hand for silence. "I know what you're thinking. This seems impossibly simple. It seems like something we should have implemented from the beginning." You're right on both counts. What Corporal James Dalton proved in Italy is that prevention, simple, primitive, unglamorous prevention, is exponentially more effective than treatment. He displayed graphs showing infection rates before and after implementation. The drop was vertical, dramatic, undeniable. December 15th, 1,847 active dysentery cases. January 15th, 109 cases, all pre-existing infections under treatment. New infection rate effectively 0. The implications extend beyond one division in Italy. We're implementing the Dalton Protocol across all theaters effective immediately. Europe, Pacific, North Africa, every unit will adopt mandatory water boiling procedures. We estimate this single change will save between 40,000 and 60,000 American lives over the course of the war. A general in the back stood. "Colonel Morrison, I'm looking at the logistics reports, the fuel consumption, the manpower requirements. These are substantial. Yes, sir. Approximately 12% manpower allocation to water sterilization operations, 18% increase in fuel consumption at frontline units. But compare that to previous medical evacuation rates. We were losing 25 to 30% of division strength to waterborne illness in some theaters. The trade-off is overwhelmingly positive. The data was irrefutable. The Dalton Protocol wasn't elegant, wasn't sophisticated, wasn't the kind of medical breakthrough that made careers. But it worked with brutal, measurable effectiveness. February 1944. Corporal Jimmy Dalton received the Bronze Star for exceptionally meritorious service from General Mark Clark, 5th Army Commander. The ceremony took place at Division Headquarters near Anzio. Clark pinned the medal to Jimmy's uniform and shook his hand. "Corporal, I'm told senior medical officers called your idea idiotic. I'm glad you ignored them. You've saved more American lives than most rifle companies. The Army owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Jimmy stood at attention, uncomfortable with the attention, thinking about the 17 body bags that started everything. "Sir, I just did what made sense. Farmers have been boiling water for centuries. I didn't invent anything." "No, Corporal. But you had the courage to challenge doctrine when doctrine was failing. That's rarer and more valuable than invention." The protocol spread through the military with remarkable speed. By March 1944, every American unit worldwide had implemented mandatory water boiling procedures. Training manuals were updated. Field sanitation courses taught the Dalton Protocol as standard operating procedure. The simplicity made it impossible to misunderstand. Boil water for 10 minutes, let cool, drink. Even the newest recruit could execute it perfectly. The long-term impact transcended the war. Post-war epidemiological studies confirmed that waterborne illness among U.S. forces dropped 89% after widespread protocol implementation. The lives saved numbered in the tens of thousands, soldiers who stayed healthy, fought effectively, and came home to families in Des Moines, Atlanta, Portland, and Philadelphia. But Jimmy Dalton never sought recognition. After the war, he returned to Lawrence, Kansas, took over his father's wheat farm, and rarely spoke about Italy. When veterans groups asked him to speak at reunions, he politely declined. When historians researched the Dalton Protocol in the 1970s, Jimmy gave brief interviews, always deflecting credit. "I didn't do anything special," he told one researcher in 1978. "I just remembered what my father taught me about keeping livestock healthy. Good water equals healthy animals." Same principle applies to soldiers. The Army made it complicated. I made it simple. James Dalton died in 1989 at age 74. His obituary in the Lawrence Journal World mentioned his Bronze Star and his contribution to military medicine in 2 brief sentences. Most of his neighbors knew him simply as the quiet farmer who grew exceptional wheat and never bragged about his service. But in Army medical journals, the Dalton Protocol remained standard reference. In 2003, the Army Medical Department named its annual award for preventive medicine innovation the James Dalton Medal. Recipients are enlisted personnel who demonstrate exceptional practical problem-solving in field conditions. The citation reads, "For demonstrating that the simplest solution, executed with determination and courage, can achieve what complexity cannot." The greatest military medical breakthrough of World War II wasn't a new drug, a surgical technique, or advanced technology. It was a farm boy from Kansas, remembering that heat kills bacteria, that prevention beats treatment, and that sometimes the most idiotic-sounding idea is the one that saves thousands of lives. The lesson endures. American pragmatism, applied with courage and conviction, can solve problems that seemed unsolvable. Jimmy Dalton proved that expertise matters less than wisdom, that formal education matters less than practical knowledge, and that one person willing to challenge failed doctrine can change history. 15,000 soldiers returned to their families because a corporal from Kansas remembered his father's advice about boiling water. That's not just a military success story. That's proof that ordinary Americans, armed with common sense and uncommon determination, can accomplish the extraordinary when they refuse to accept failure as inevitable. That simple farm wisdom saved more American lives than many battles. If this untold story of WWII moved you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible accounts of unsung heroes who changed history through courage and ingenuity. Drop a comment below. Do you know of other simple solutions that changed wars? Let's honor those who thought differently and saved thousands. Hit that like button and share this story.